Have you ever found yourself in a conversation? A flicker of doubt crossing your mind? A nagging sense that something just isn't adding up? Perhaps you're negotiating a deal, listening to a loved one explain a late night, or even just observing a politician on television. In those moments, do you ever wish you had a secret decoder ring, a way to peer behind the curtain and truly understand what's going on in someone's head? Well, the truth is, you can. And it's not about mind reading or some mystical power. It's about understanding the subtle, often unconscious signals that human beings constantly broadcast. These are the same techniques, refined over decades, that professional profilers and interrogators use to uncover the truth. The FBI, and indeed any seasoned investigator, doesn't rely on guesswork. They rely on observation and a systematic understanding of human behavior. Imagine being able to walk into any room, observe a few interactions, and almost instantly get a sense of who's genuine, who's uncomfortable, and who might be holding something back. This isn't about becoming a master manipulator, it's about becoming a master observer. It's about empowering yourself with the ability to navigate complex social situations, to protect yourself from deception, and to foster more honest and authentic connections. We're going to dive into 7 foundational techniques, each a piece of the puzzle that will help you start seeing the world and the people in it with newfound clarity. You might be surprised at how much information people reveal without ever saying a word. Let's start with the cornerstone, baseline behavior. This is perhaps the most critical skill to master. Think of it like this. Before you can spot a lie, you need to know what the truth looks like. Every individual has a unique baseline of behavior, their typical way of speaking, their natural gestures, their usual eye contact, their default posture when they're relaxed and truthful. For instance, I once had a case involving a quiet, unassuming man named Arthur, accused of petty theft. When he was calm, discussing his day, he'd occasionally glance up and to the right, a common pattern for accessing visual memories. His hands would be still, resting on the table. But the moment I introduced a question about the missing item, his eyes darted down and to the left, and his right hand began to subtly tap his thumb against his index finger, a habit I'd never seen him do before. That deviation from his baseline, that subtle shift, was a significant indicator. To establish a baseline, observe someone in a neutral conversation. Ask them about their hobbies, their favorite food, their weekend plans. Watch how they sit, how they gesture, where their eyes go. What's their normal? What's your normal? Have you ever truly paid attention to your own baseline behaviors when you're completely at ease? Understanding this initial reference point is paramount, because every subsequent technique we discuss relies on identifying deviations from it. Without a baseline, you're just guessing. Once you have a baseline, you can start looking for microexpressions. These are fleeting, involuntary facial expressions that last only a fraction of a second, often betraying a person's true emotions even when they're trying to conceal them. They're like tiny emotional leaks. Think of my client, Sarah, who insisted she was perfectly fine after a difficult meeting. Her words were calm, her smile was polite, but for a split second, I caught a flash of anger, a tightening of the lips, a slight furrow in her brow that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. It told me everything I needed to know about her true feelings, despite her verbal reassurances. The science behind this is fascinating. These expressions are wired directly to our limbic system, the ancient part of our brain responsible for emotions, meaning they bypass conscious control. What do you look for? A flash of fear might involve widened eyes and raised eyebrows. Disgust often presents as a wrinkled nose and raised upper lip. Sadness can show as a slight pulling down of the mouth corners. It takes practice to spot them, almost like learning to see a new color. Have you ever seen someone's face betray their words, even for a blink? It's often a micro-expression at play. Beyond the face, listen closely to voice and speech patterns. The way someone speaks can be just as revealing as what they say. When people are under stress, their vocal patterns often change. This could manifest as a higher pitch, a cracking voice, an increase in speech rate, or conversely, a sudden slowing down. Pauses might become more frequent or lengthier, indicating they're searching for words or constructing a narrative. Consider a suspect I once interviewed, a seemingly confident individual. As long as we discussed generalities, his voice was steady and calm. But the moment I introduced specific evidence related to the case, his voice subtly began to quiver, and he started using more verbal fillers. As if buying time. These aren't necessarily signs of guilt, but they are deviations from the baseline, signals that indicate increased cognitive load or emotional discomfort. Our vocal cords are incredibly sensitive to our emotional state, controlled by the autonomic nervous system. When we're nervous or trying to deceive, our bodies go into a subtle fight or flight response, which can constrict the vocal cords or affect breath control. Have you ever noticed your own voice change when you're anxious or excited? Pay attention to those shifts in others. They often tell a powerful story. Next, we scrutinize body language red flags. While some body language cues are commonly misunderstood, there are clear red flags that, when combined with other indicators, can signal deception or discomfort. These aren't isolated gestures, but rather clusters of behaviors that deviate from a person's baseline. For example, excessive self-touching, rubbing the neck, fiddling with clothes, touching the face, can be pacifying behaviors, attempts to self-soothe under stress. Or consider someone who suddenly becomes very rigid or, conversely, overly expansive in their gestures. I recall a witness who, when asked about a crucial detail, suddenly crossed her arms tightly and turned her body slightly away from me, despite having been open and engaged just moments before. This closing off, this defensive posture, was a clear signal of discomfort. From a physiological standpoint, our bodies often react to perceived threats by either trying to make ourselves smaller and less vulnerable or by unconsciously creating barriers. This isn't about looking for a single twitch. It's about observing changes in overall posture, orientation, and subtle barrier gestures. Have you ever unconsciously mirrored someone's posture when you felt a connection, or pulled back when you felt uneasy? These are universal, primal reactions. Now, let's talk about eye movement clues. The eyes, as they say, are windows to the soul, and they can certainly offer clues to what's happening internally. While not a definitive indicator of truth or lies on its own, certain eye movements can suggest cognitive processing. For instance, someone remembering a truthful event might often look up and to their right if they are right-handed, accessing stored visual memories. Conversely, someone constructing a visual image, perhaps fabricating a story, might look up and to their left. If they're accessing auditory memories, they might look to the side, and if constructing sounds, to the opposite side. A client of mine, Mr. Henderson, was describing a robbery he witnessed. When recalling the color of the getaway car, his eyes went up and right. But when I asked him about a detail that wasn't in his initial statement, the number of people in the car, his eyes went up and to his left, and he paused, almost visibly building the image. It's crucial to remember that this is a generalization and can vary based on handedness and individual differences. But deviations from a person's own baseline eye patterns are what you're looking for. Our brains are complex, and these eye movements are essentially our internal search engines at work. Have you ever caught yourself looking away when trying to remember something difficult or looking up when trying to visualize a solution? Next up, question loops. This is a powerful interrogation technique, but you can adapt its principles for everyday interactions. A question loop involves re-asking a question, sometimes in a slightly different way, to observe consistency in the response and nonverbal cues. If someone is being truthful, their story and their behavior will generally remain consistent, even when re-asked. If they're fabricating, maintaining consistency becomes much harder, and you'll often see more deviations from their baseline. More pacifying gestures, more eye shifts, changes in vocal tone. I once questioned a suspect, a young man named Michael, about his alibi for a specific evening. He initially gave a smooth, detailed account. Later, I circled back and asked the same question, but framed it slightly differently, as if seeking clarification on a minor point. His initial confident demeanor faltered, his eyes began to dart, and he started adding unnecessary details, almost over-explaining, which he hadn't done before. This cognitive strain of maintaining a falsehood often reveals itself. Our brains are efficient. They don't like to work harder than they have to. If you're creating a story, your brain has to constantly verify it against itself, which takes effort. Have you ever been asked the same question multiple times and felt yourself getting flustered if your story wasn't completely solid?